She was hidden in the bushes, overwhelmed by fear and horror. Her legs trembled, and her heart raced. Lost and unsure of what to do, she was drenched in sweat despite the cold night. From her hiding spot, she saw Samuel and Toba, along with Uncle Ikenna, standing over the lifeless body of Ikenna, her best friend and first love. Ikenna lay on the ground with a knife stabbed in his stomach, his eyes wide open, tears flowing from them, but his lips remained sealed, unable to call for help. Chat shifted her gaze from Ikenna to Samuel and Toba, who were deep in conversation. "If we throw him into the river, his body will resurface soon, and everyone will know he was murdered," Samuel said. Toba replied, "But if we tie him to a stone, his body will sink, and no one will ever find it. It must remain a secret between us, one we'll take to our graves." They carried Ikenna's body, tied it to a large stone, and placed it in a canoe. They paddled to the deep part of the river, where they threw Ikenna's body into the water, watching it sink. Chat realized that it was time to escape. She ran as fast as she could, making her way back to her father's house. Out of breath, she found her father reading the newspaper outside while listening to local music on the radio. Her stepmother was in the corner, preparing dinner. "Where have you been? Come here and peel this cassava so I can finish in time," her stepmother ordered. Chat approached and took the mortar to grind the cassava, though her hands trembled. The images of what she had just witnessed haunted her. Her stepmother, angry, slapped her. "If you don't do this properly, you'll go to bed hungry tonight, you lazy and unlucky child." Chat continued grinding the cassava to avoid going to bed without food. But she could hear Samuel and Toba's voices. Her heart raced, thinking they had seen her in the bushes and had returned to kill her too. Sweat dripped from her, and panic set in. "Chi," Samuel called, using the affectionate nickname he had for her. Samuel was a close friend of Chat's father, a respected teacher at the local school. Toba, a butcher, was also a close friend of Chat's father, who often helped him sell meat at the market. "Good evening, sir," Chat stammered, trembling. Samuel gently patted her on the back, telling her to be a good girl. Then he and Toba sat down with Chat's father. Chat sighed in relief, realizing they weren't there to harm her. But she was still curious about their conversation. "Could my father know what they've done?" she wondered, but pushed the thought away and continued her work. The next day at school, Chat sat alone, missing Ikenna. During the break, a meeting was called, and Mr. Samuel climbed onto the podium. "I've learned that Ikenna left the house yesterday and hasn't returned. His mother is very worried. If anyone knows where he is, please tell him to come home." The entire assembly responded in unison, "Yes, sir." In class, Chat noticed Ikenna's mother, Mrs. Oi, sitting in front of the headmaster's desk, crying uncontrollably. Chat felt sorry for her. Mrs. Oi was the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the village and had inherited his fortune after his mysterious death. Ikenna, their only child, was the heir. Samuel had been greedy, trying to marry Mrs. Oi to claim her husband's wealth, but she refused. That afternoon, Chat couldn't shake the image of Ikenna's death. She had to tell someone, but who could she trust? She knew she couldn't go to Samuel, who was guilty. She decided to visit Mrs. Oi, to tell her the truth. When Chat finished her chores, she quietly slipped away from home and went to Mrs. Oi's house. There, she found Mrs. Oi surrounded by people comforting her about Ikenna's disappearance. Among them were Samuel and Toba. Chat couldn't turn back now. She greeted the elders, and as soon as Mrs. Oy saw her, she stood up, grabbed Chat's clothes, and cried, "You were his best friend. Tell me where my son is. Find him for me." The other women held her back, and one shouted at Chat to leave. "Your presence reminds her of Ikenna. Don't come here again." Chat left, heartbroken and crying, with no one to trust with the truth. Chat was her father's only child, as her mother had died giving birth to her. After her mother's death, her father remarried, and her stepmother mistreated her, blaming her for his wife's death. Chat had no friends except Ikenna. His death affected her deeply. She considered going to the police, but feared they wouldn't believe a teenager over adults. She also thought about telling her father, but their relationship was tense, and she feared he might be involved too. Chat was one of the best students in her class, and her teacher, Mrs. Amir, was fond of her. Mrs. Amir always encouraged Chat to keep studying despite the difficulties she faced. When Chat returned home, she encountered Mrs. Amir, and although she wiped her tears, Mrs. Amir could see something was wrong. "How are you?" she asked with concern. "I'm fine," Chat lied, but deep down, she longed to tell someone the truth. The next day, there was a general test at school. Chat hadn't been able to study due to the turmoil in her heart. After the test, Mrs. Amir was surprised to see her score so low, only 1 point out of 20. "Chat, what's wrong?" Mrs. Amir asked after class. "You usually perform so well." Chat initially wanted to lie, but looking into Mrs. Amir's caring eyes, she felt she could trust her. After thinking for a moment, Chat apologized and closed the door. She approached Mrs. Amir and confessed, "I know who killed my best friend, Ikenna. I saw it happen." Mrs. Amir was shocked at first, but when she saw Chat's tears, she knew the girl wasn't lying. She comforted her and asked for the details. Chat then told her everything: the meeting by the river, the conversation between Samuel and Toba, the cold murder, and the disposal of Ikenna's body. Mrs. Amir promised to keep Chat safe and warned her not to tell anyone else for her own protection. She then accompanied Chat home, making sure no one was watching. Later, Mrs. Amir decided to report the crime to the police. She knew that Mr. Samuel's connections in the village would make things difficult, but she couldn't remain silent. She went to Officer Okoro at the police station and told him everything. Officer Okoro, a man of integrity, believed her. "We'll investigate immediately," he assured her, stressing the need for discretion to protect Chat. Mrs. Amir took every precaution to keep Chat safe. They met in secret, and Chat remained terrified but trusted Mrs. Amir. Meanwhile, Samuel and Toba remained unaware of the investigation. Toba grew nervous but dismissed his suspicions, while Samuel, though cautious, was confident the crime would remain hidden. The police gathered evidence, and Chat's story was corroborated by others who had seen Samuel and Toba by the river that night. The circumstantial evidence was mounting, and eventually, they were ready to make an arrest. One evening, Samuel was summoned to the police station for questioning. He entered the interrogation room confidently but soon realized something was wrong. Officer Okoro looked at him coldly. "We know what you did," he said. "The truth will come out." After hours of questioning, Samuel cracked under pressure and confessed to Ikenna's murder, explaining how he and Toba had plotted to kill him and take his inheritance. Toba, confronted with the evidence, also confessed. The village was shaken by the revelation. Many suspected Samuel's involvement in shady dealings, but no one could have predicted such a crime. When the news spread, Ikenna's family, especially his mother, was devastated but relieved that justice had been served. Chat felt both loss and satisfaction, knowing that Ikenna's death wouldn't be in vain. Samuel and Toba would face consequences. Mrs. Amir, too, felt pride, knowing her courage helped bring the truth to light. In the end, the village learned that justice could prevail, even against powerful forces. Chat, though young, had shown immense bravery and helped change the course of the community's history.